but the 10 principles I'm going to go through on this video are the ones that I believe are the most essential to understand and probably the least esoteric. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Number 5, always distinguish between empty and full, yin and yang. Before I get into this essential principle, you'll start to notice as you watch the remaining principles and reflect back on the preceding principles that they're all trying to get to the same thing, the same idea that our movement is coming from the core, and it's trying to define how those core movements work together to produce our whole body fluid movement. So differentiating empty from full. This is a great concept, and it means to some people in Tai Chi that we're just thinking about where our weight is. We empty one leg and then we have one leg that is full. So we can essentially have all of our weight on one side of the body that's full and then one leg that is empty. And then we can shift over and we have empty on my left and full on the right. Other people and myself would interpret the empty and full not just relating to where your weight is, but it applies to everything in your body, empty or full, because our body is split between our spine, left half and right half, and our core muscles are divided into left or right. And when we think about proper posture, balance, and movement, we have to use the core muscles on one side or the other, meaning my upper waist muscles either are going to be turning to the right from the left upper waist or turning to the left from the right upper waist. They are never moving forward at the same time when we're standing up on two legs, because I mentioned earlier that forward motion or rotation from the upper waist, if we are lying down on the floor, it also combines with forward flexion. That's what these muscles do. My external oblique on the left rotates the spine to the right and flexes it forward. When we're standing up on two legs, we are constantly counterbalancing that forward motion as long as we are doing it in a rotational fashion. If I start to move forward on the left and at the same time move forward on the right, that's when I begin to pitch over and fall. So I have to distinguish which side is active, left or right. It also applies to our lower abs. Our lower abs are either rotating backwards on the left and rooting my left leg, or rotating backwards on the right and rooting my right leg. As opposed to the upper waist muscles, which pitch the body forward like this, the lower ab muscles tuck the pelvis under like this, flexing the lumbar spine up. When we have one side active, it keeps the pelvis in a neutral tilt like this. If I have both sides active, it's going to pitch the pelvis backwards and the body forward in this manner, over pitching the pelvis so we actually will fall over. The same thing for the hips. When we activate the hips, we're activating one side to push. Imagine if you try to push by extending from your glutes on the left and the right at the same time, you're basically pushing against each other. And so we need to distinguish which side is active. And so that active side is the full side. The passive side that is not pushing, it is not doing nothing, but I'm only thinking of pushing from my right hip. I'm not trying to think of pulling or pushing from the left hip at the same time. If we apply empty and full to our standing posture, we're going to understand how it works and how it can work ineffectively if we're not doing it correctly. When I'm standing with vertical posture, I am full on one side of the waist, upper and lower, and full on one side of my hips. So I'm standing with my weight rooted now on my right leg, which you can't see because you can't see the rotation happening in the waist. But I have my upper waist turning around to the left, I have my lower abs turning around to the right, and I have my right hip inflection. That's what produces this standing posture. If I exaggerate that right upper waist rotation, you'll see I don't go anywhere because I'm already in that position. As opposed to if I use my upper waist on the left and begin to move, it moves me to a new position because it's not where I was before. I have taken the full side on the right and now emptied it as I fill the left side. And when we're walking, we begin by doing that. If I have my weight rooted on the right, I begin the motion by switching the full side from right to left, and you can see the arm begin to move forward. And after I do that, I switch the lower abs by changing my rotation from right to left, and that switches the weight to the left leg. And you can see immediately how the right knee begins to bend because it's been released from the ground. If I go back here, my right leg is rooted to the ground. I begin the motion, and then I use the lower abs on the left. So I've filled the left side of the lower abs, I've emptied the right side, and it empties the weight off of my right leg. Then I'm able to now switch the hip energy and fill the left side, remove the energy from the right side, and pull forward to take the step. We're constantly switching back empty and full on one side, including the waist, upper and lower, and hips. And the arms are reflecting that motion. The arm movement as we start to take a step reflects that I'm filling the left and emptying the right, which is why the right arm begins to drop back as I fill the left to take a step. And with each step, we cycle back and forth between full on the left and then full on the right. And we can see the arms and legs reflecting those movements. What happens if we are not aware of empty and full? We can see this in our posture. When we're standing with normal posture, we have activation of one side of the upper waist and one side of the lower waist. If I were to activate both sides of the upper abs at the same time, meaning I'm already forward here on the right in this stable posture, but if I try to go forward on the left at the same time, I'm now going to fall forward. And so that would obviously not be good for balance. On the other hand, if I am active on the right and I remove that activity, it's going to cause me to start falling backwards because I don't have that forward motion on one side keeping me balanced. What happens when we move incorrectly is we compensate for something that we're doing wrong. So if I remove this activation, the fullness on the right, without activating the left, and I start to fall backwards, what people do is they compensate by tucking both sides of the lower abs at the same time to counterbalance so I don't fall over. So now I have prevented myself from falling back by tucking the pelvis too much with both sides of the lower abs, and now I have a slouching posture. This is very bad posture, but it's functional in that I didn't fall over because I compensated by too much use of the lower abs, compensating for no use of the upper abs. And this is what happens when we have a slouched posture. Now, what happens if we have the lower abs and we don't have them activated? So if I have one side of the lower abs activated, my pelvis is in a neutral position. If I deactivate that, it's going to cause the pelvis to start pitching forward and the body to start falling backward because there's nothing holding me up. But what happens to people when that occurs is they now can activate both sides of the upper waist to lean forward, and now we have counterbalance. The pelvis went backwards and an anterior tilt, and the upper body went forward. And so now I have terrible posture, but I'm not falling over. I've compensated with both sides of the upper waist, nothing active in the lower abs. And this is obviously a very terrible posture, but this you might see in somebody who's very elderly and has very weak lower abs and is shuffling around with their gait because they don't have any activation here. So that happens to older people, doesn't happen so much with people who are much younger and still have good functioning muscles. But what happens for younger people is they do this same thing, but in order to erect the posture, they activate their glutes to push the body back up into this position. And so this is that rounded chest, hollowed back, exaggerated lumbar lordosis, and anterior pelvic tilt posture that people get. And when you see them walking, you're going to see the arms flailing behind the body. That's part of that posture because you have extension coming from the glutes, which causes the upper back to extend, which causes this motion in the arm muscle because of that back extension. We're no longer functioning in front of the body here because we deactivated the lower abs, did the upper abs incorrectly, and compensated all of it by extending the glutes and extending the upper back. And so now I am standing vertically, but I have very bad posture. I also have my upper chest and arm energy pulling backwards, so I do not have available reach here, and I'm going to be straining myself as I'm using the arms in front of the body. This is going to make me more at risk for shoulder problems, carpal tunnel syndrome, stuff like that. And getting that rounded chest back into this hollowed position where we're now have function in front of us where we can really reach, where we couldn't do that in this position. You really can't reach very well without bad compensations like leaning forward. That's why it's so important for all of this to coordinate together. It's a little bit difficult to just change that suddenly without exercises because I always would notice when somebody in my office had anterior pelvic tilt like this, and then I would try to get them to tuck their pelvis under, what would happen is they would just do that because they haven't gotten rid of the other compensations. So you have to get rid of all of the dysfunction at the same time, taking away that glute extension, tucking the lower abs, and getting the upper waist moving together so we're all now synced up in alignment of the spine. Doing exercises like planks on the ground can help you line up those core muscles more properly and then translate that into your standing posture. But essentially, when we're not using that empty and full correctly, we end up with all types of posture problems that can affect our health in the long run.